Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second week of business writing. I'm going to record two mandatory lectures this week and then publish a third one later in the week for those who want to complete a final project for this class. Those will be the ones who want to be in the A range. So bear with me for these two lectures. The first one's a little philosophical. The second one ties back a little bit more closely to our course. And in my second lecture, I'm going to give some updates to the syllabus and our direction a little bit, just in light of what's been said in the discussion so far, which has been really good work. So A+ to everybody on that. And yeah, we'll make some changes, but I'll do that next lecture. So for this one, let's jump into not what is rhetoric, but what is language, what is rhetoric, and of course down here, what does all of that mean for business writing? Because I'm sure you've heard these words before, particularly if you have taken E110. But you might be thinking, how does all that tie to business writing, which seems a lot different? And so the textbook that you're reading jumps in with this question, what is language? And they have a couple of good definitions. The first one they offer is a system of symbols, words, and/or gestures used to communicate meaning, which I think is an okay starting place. But I like when they get a little bit more specific and they say language is something that's arbitrary and symbolic. And I think these are great words for how we think about language. It's arbitrary in the sense that we've sort of picked these particular signs by consensus as a society to mean particular things, but ultimately they're just marks on a page or they're just sounds that travel between me and you. And then symbolic, right? Language always stands in for something else. And sometimes even when we figured out what it means, it still stands in for something else. You can think about subliminal messages in advertising or maybe what somebody means kind of underneath what they're really saying. But at the end of the day, I think some of looking at language that way is too simplistic, and your textbook eventually agrees with that too. But I wanted to take a sort of sideway entrance into this. And so a problem that's brought up by a philosopher at the beginning of the 20th century is that we try to define language as an idling engine, not as a complex system constantly in the process of functioning. So a lot of times when we're thinking about language, we're thinking about this static system out there that just kind of works. But Wittgenstein, the philosopher's point is, well, the real way to understand language is by looking at how people use it and looking at all of the different contexts, or what he calls games, that people use language for. And so the solution, this comes from Marie McGinn, who is reading Wittgenstein, is to think about language use as a game or as a purposeful activity towards some result. And so that was the point of some of those early exercises I gave you, like the text message and the email. These are essentially language games where we're experimenting with language we're using and trying to think about, how do we put these words together to get to the result that I've kind of pictured? And I guess I sort of gave you results to shoot for in the case studies, but ideally you were thinking about some of your own preferred results as well. And so the textbook eventually does get to this point, and it does say that languages are living exchange systems of meaning. And so by living, I think they imply this kind of always changing aspect of language and are bound by context. And so those are the games, those are the contexts that we're talking about when we think about language, right? Because the language you use in the classroom or the language you use to a professor is going to vary a lot from the language that you use to a boss or to a coworker or even to a subordinate in your company. These are all different contexts, different games where you sort of have to experiment with what language means and how it works. And so the other question that I ask that the textbook seems to have answered is, what is rhetoric? I took a definition here from the American Heritage Dictionary, just to get our conversation started here. But they say the art or study of using language effectively and persuasively. The art or study of using language effectively and persuasively. Sorry, I put it twice. And so I did want to emphasize, I think what I meant to do was bold art or study, which I think are really interesting words, because that's not exactly what the textbook presents. Instead of art or study, they seem to imply that rhetoric is a strategy. And they give you a couple of those strategies for thinking about rhetoric. The first one's the classical one. I'll reiterate the parts of that during one of the open letter case studies for this week. The other one they give is the Toulmin argument. That's kind of a simple one that I think we use naturally when we're talking, or hopefully you kind of use naturally. But that's to have a claim, which is some point you want to make, data, some evidence to back up that claim. And then the last one he mentions is warrant. And a warrant is just tying together that data to the claim. So how exactly is my data backing up my claim? The other one, you might recognize this from high school English, is gas capped or gas capped. I'm going to do my best to remember what this abbreviation stands for, but I believe these are arguments by generalization, authority, sign, cause, analogy, principle, and testimony. And so just to go back over those, generalization is when you're making a big point, you're kind of, you're stating kind of what's already out there or what people kind of generally believe. The next one was authority, when you take somebody who really knows what they're talking about and you say, this person said it, so I kind of agree. Sign is traditionally what you would think about as evidence or data, statistics, things like that. Cause or consequence is C, which can be either one, but essentially means how do you tie together the evidence to the claim, kind of like a warrant. When two things are happening, why are they consequences of each other? A was analogy, how are two things alike? P was principle, making a claim to values or some abstraction, and T is testimony. What do you personally experience? Another crucial part of rhetoric is recognizing fallacies. There's a full list in your textbook on 192. Some of the most important, I think, to focus on for business writing is the red herring argument, people bringing up sort of other things as a distraction from centrally what's going on. Ad hominem, in business situations, you never want to attack someone personally for the sake of your reputation and their reputation. And then post hoc, which is a kind of tough one to explain, but the post hoc fallacy is when you assume that because something happened, that caused something else when maybe there isn't a causal relationship there. So like, hey, ever since I sent that angry text, the business has been doing really well, might be an example of fallacious thinking. But centrally for me, I always return to the appeals. These you also maybe learned in high school English or definitely in E110. Appealing to the emotions through pathos, to logic through logos, and through character, value, or expertise through ethos. And I just wanted to show you a couple examples of how that plays out in business writing, right? Because I've made this sort of detachment between academic writing and business writing, but they do share rhetoric in common. And so pathos was the appeal to the emotions. And I just took out some examples from the work I've already seen in this class. And so when we think about the leadership text message case study, one student wrote, "Coach called me into his office earlier today to let me know he's retiring and will no longer be with us. This may come as a shock to you because it is so abrupt. We need to appreciate what he's done for us, but also realize our capabilities as a team." And so there's a few appeals here to emotions, right? First, we see it's a shock. It's acknowledging that, hey, that emotion is out there. There's appreciation and recognizing sort of where we've come from, and then our capabilities as a team to appeal to optimism and what people might expect to happen in the future. And here's one from the Applebee's email case study. I want to make sure everyone feels fairly represented, so please feel free to email or text me at any point if you have any questions, concerns, or even suggestions. And so this idea of wanting to make sure everyone feels represented is a huge appeal to the emotion, right? People feel they're part of a community, people feel they're respected through this claim. Logos, again, I'll use the email case study. Many of you have heard about and read the email that has been circulating, written by Wayne Pancrantz concerning wages and payroll. I'm writing to announce that Pancrantz has been terminated and the ideas presented in that email will not be in effect now or ever. So a few factual things, right? Many of you have heard about this email. They named the person who's responsible. They write that the person's been terminated, all facts, right? And then will not be in effect now or ever. And so all these appeals strictly to logic and facts. And another piece of that can be kind of evidence. So from the leadership, as a team, we can't thank him enough for what he has done for us. 5 titles from the Big East Conference and 4 appearances in the Final Four, right? To say he's done a lot, and here are some facts that back that up. And lastly, ethos. Here's an appeal to values. Applebee's strong core values include trust, inclusion, community, integrity, excellence, innovation, and accountability. And so setting the tone of the email and claiming, hey, directly to our core values. And then from the discussion, I took one comment. I'm sorry, I forgot who wrote this one, but as someone who is going into the accounting world, I am sure you will have to send plenty of emails. And so this person's making that appeal to authority to say, hey, I'm somebody who's in this field. And so those are some of the ways that you see rhetoric play out in business writing. In the case studies this week and in the discussions, I'll ask you to think a little bit more deeply about that. But that'll conclude our first lecture for the second week. Thanks, everyone.